Morning. I'll call to order the July 9th meeting of the St. Louis County Board of Police Commissioners. Would you call the roll, Amy?
Commissioner Gardner?
Here.
Commissioner Hassler? Here. Commissioner Price?
Here.
Commissioner Punch? Here. And Commissioner Schwer? Here.
I'm going to stand and say the pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I understand we have an officer to swear in. Do you want to come forward? Are you Benjamin?
Yes, sir.
All right. Benjamin, if you would raise your hand and swear after me. I, Benjamin Santoyo,
I, Benjamin Santoyo,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I'm a citizen of the United States
that I'm a citizen of the United States
and a resident of the state of Missouri,
and a resident of the state of Missouri,
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
and laws of the United States,
and laws of the United States,
the state of Missouri,
the state of Missouri,
the charter and ordinances of St. Louis County,
charter and ordinances of St. Louis County,
that I will faithfully adhere
that I will faithfully adhere
to the regulations provided in the rules and procedures
to the regulations provided in the rules and procedures
for deputization
for deputization
as adopted by St. Louis County,
as adopted by St. Louis County,
and I will faithfully demean myself
and I will faithfully demean myself
as a deputized officer
as deputized officer
of the St. Louis County Police.
of the St. Louis County Police.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We have quite a bit to cover today. And I think the first presentation from the chief concerns the CIT. Or do you have a report other than that first?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'd like to introduce Sergeant Gary Robertson. He's in charge of our CIT, or Crisis Intervention Team program, and he has a short presentation for the board.
Thank you. Morning, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Gary Robertson. I'm a sergeant with the St. Louis County Police Department, and I am the supervisor of the Crisis Intervention Unit. Ultimately, one of my roles and responsibilities of being the supervisor of the Crisis Intervention Unit, I'm going to pass these along. It's just some information packets about the Crisis Intervention Team program. Ultimately, being the supervisor of the Crisis Intervention Unit, one of my roles and responsibilities is being the CIT coordinator. So ultimately, I am responsible for the CIT program. For those of you that aren't aware, CIT is an international level of advanced training that police officers receive with dealing with and understanding those members of the community that have mental health disorders. And they're especially trained in de-escalating those situations and understanding the community resources that are available to get them the help that they need. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the history. The history of CIT in the St. Louis County Police Department is that it was brought to St. Louis County in 2003. That was when we established our program. We established our area coordinating council, and we held our very first advanced 40-hour training at the police academy. With that, as of today, out of the 1,000 commissioned police officers that we have, 520 of those are CIT trained and certified. So just a little bit more than half. We would have a higher number, but due to COVID constraints, we haven't had the opportunity to hold 3 of our advanced level trainings so far this year alone. So therefore, our average with the county police is between 10 and 20 officers attending that training. So I look at that as, that's nearly, between 40 and 60 officers that our numbers would be trained if it wasn't for the COVID pandemic. Now I'm going to list daily roles and responsibilities of the Crisis Intervention Unit. And the one thing I do want to apologize with, I have 10 minutes of your time. We normally give this community presentation to all different types of community outreach individuals, from social workers, whoever wants to know about CIT within our community. we give community presentations, and we average between 3 and 6 of those, again, before the whole entire COVID pandemic started. So with that, actually the most recent reach out that we did was a Zoom meeting where we talked about CIT to a group of residents from Barnes Emergency Department. But we're still trying to get out and talk and share the CIT program as much as possible. It's normally a 60-minute presentation. I have about 8 minutes now of your time. So with that, I would, I definitely want to apologize. I'm going to try to squeeze us into 8 minutes of your time, but I definitely want to welcome and invite any of you. I'm going to give my business card at the end of this. It has my email address and my work cell number. So that way, if you ever want to sit down and have the opportunity to look at the full PowerPoint that we give the citizens of St. Louis County talking about our program, I'd love to have that opportunity to discuss that further with all of you. So roles and responsibilities of the CIU is first, we conduct follow-ups. When we're conducting follow-ups, that is basically going out in the community and we're establishing relationships with those that have some type of mental illness. How does that initiate? Out of the 8 precincts that we have CIT officers that are working those patrol beats 24 hours, 365. We always have a CIT officer on one shift in one precinct at any point in time to be able to respond to these calls for service. When they respond to these calls for service involving EDP, violent EDP, or attempt suicides, EDP being emotionally disturbed persons, then they conduct a CIT report. We average, all right, with reports that are being referred to my office, between 70 and 150 CIT reports a month. So what we do is, myself and Officer Kester, we are the only 2 full-time crisis intervention officers in all of St. Louis County. So with that, we review and we triage those reports to the best of our ability. So anytime, for example, we take those that are the most sick or displaying the most severe signs and symptoms of mental illness, such as command hallucinations or severe psychosis, we will then put them on our follow-up list, and we're going to try to get face-to-face with them as soon as we possibly can. We average between 20 and 40 face-to-face follow-ups per month. Why could that be 20 sometimes? We might actually respond to somebody's house and have a face-to-face follow-up with them, and that could actually just take 4 to 5 hours of our time with rapport building or possibly taking them to the hospital because they need that transport. So just one patient contact, again, could take half of our day, sometimes even the entire day. Out of those follow-ups, when we go out into the community, I have 2 CMHLs, community mental health liaisons, that are assigned to my team. What is a community mental health liaison? They are master's level clinicians and licensed social workers with the state of Missouri that are assigned to my team. One works for behavioral health response, one works for BJC behavioral health. What we do is we utilize that social worker and that CMHL as an excellent opportunity to know and expand the resources that are available that as a police officer, I might not be able to call BJC or SSM behavioral health or Mercy behavioral health and schedule an appointment or actually confirm the next time that this patient and client has an appointment. So the CMHL program has been hugely successful with us being able to go to somebody's house, build rapport with them, and then get them the help that they might need.
Do you mind if I interject a question?
Sure.
Is that program part of your budget?
The CMHL program? No, it is not. It was initiated in 2013 by Governor Jay Nixon, and it is completely funded by the Department of Mental Health. So is CIT. The CIT training programs that we hold, they are not funded by the police academy and the police budget. They are funded by the Department of Mental Health. And that's on the sheets that I actually provided you. These are the Missouri State CIT Council. This is basically, we abide by a majority of their curriculum, and we're funded by them. So when we hold our trainings, this isn't just Sergeant Robertson and Officer Kester sitting down and teaching you 40 hours of advanced level training with understanding mental illness, understanding the medications, antipsychotics that individuals take in the community. We bring in between 26 Typically in our 40-hour program, we have 26 or 27 subject matter experts from throughout the community that come in to teach our program. So with that, our next daily role and responsibility is that Officer Kester and I, we are members, and I'm the coordinator of our crisis negotiation team. A year and a half ago, St. Louis County, we created the first ever crisis negotiation team to assist tactical operations in negotiating with mentally ill and suicidal barricaded subjects. With that, I have, myself included, I have 5 crisis negotiators that are trained in crisis intervention. They have 40 hours of basic negotiating skills, and they've also received 40 hours of advanced hostage negotiation skills. And in the last year and a half, we've documented more than 600 hours of training. So we are on call 24/7, 365 to assist tactical operations in the Bureau of Tactical Support and the Division of Patrol with communicating and negotiating compliance surrenders out of individuals that are having mental health crisis or that have possibly committed felony crimes and they're barricaded, and our tactical operations team is going out to fix that situation. So with that, our next role and responsibility is Officer Kester and I are full-time task force officers with the FBI St. Louis field office. What we do for the field office is we are assigned to the violent crime squad, and we conduct crisis intervention and threat assessments for the federal government. The federal government and federal agents receive no type of training when it comes to mental illness. So they actually, throughout very strong collaboration and relationships that we have between the FBI and the St. Louis County Police Department, they approached us about a year and a half ago, to where we went through the process to where myself and Officer Kester, we have top secret security clearance that allows us building access. They've allowed us computer access. We're now members of their team. With that, we conduct crisis intervention work for them and also threat assessments. The goal of that is anytime there is a federal threat that comes in, let's say somebody posts on Facebook that they are considering a mass killer event at a church or at a school, then myself and Officer Kester, along with 1 or 2 FBI agents, we're going to get face-to-face with them, and we're going to determine what level of threat they are, if they have access to means, and then we're going to mitigate that threat to the best of our ability, and we're going to get them in connection with the appropriate resources if it is a mental health emergency, or is it just strictly a crime. So we're going to put them in accordance with the best resources available. A program that we started in May of this year is the Suicide Loss Family Resource Program. A majority of crisis intervention work that's done is reactive, not proactive. I can't determine when somebody's going to go into a mental health crisis or when somebody is actually going to complete suicide. So we created a program to where we will actually respond to any family or next of kin that has the loss where someone, a family member or friend, dies by suicide. Within 72 hours, Officer Kester, myself, and one of my CNHLs, we will go out to that family. We'll not only offer condolences from the county police department, but then we will put them in, we will reach out to them and offer resources and counseling if need be. There are studies that have been done that show that between 42 and 48%, once somebody dies by suicide within a family, there's a 42 to 48% chance that another member will die by suicide. So we do what we can to offer services to make sure that we prevent that from happening. We are the diversionary court liaisons for the county counselor's office and the state prosecutor's office. A large piece of what we do when we recognize that somebody's in a mental health crisis and the CIT officers are out there on the street and they're going to these 911 calls for service and they're responding to individuals that are possibly, let's say they are not compliant with medication or they're undiagnosed and never had an opportunity to be diagnosed and they commit a crime. The CIT officers that make contact with that individual will recognize that mental illness or that possible mental illness, and then they will refer those charges to the diversionary courts. We've had diversionary courts established here for more than a decade, and they're very well established, and we have very good relationships. So for example, if somebody commits an assault while they're suffering from a state of psychosis, that officer will refer that case to the mental health court, where rather than getting them fines or giving them jail time, we're giving them state mandated help and diversion to where we can help them find their wellness. We also instruct. We assist and facilitate the instruction of the 40-hour basic, 8-hour advanced, 24-hour veterans, and 24-hour youth CIT programs. I personally teach 4 hours of de-escalation to our recruits. And then we teach 8 hours of mental health first aid, which is a 8-hour explanation and basic understanding of mental health crisis and mental health disorders. So that way, when the police recruits graduate from the academy, they have an understanding of mental health crisis and how to de-escalate those situations. And then that affords them the opportunity to get through their probationary period and then attend the 40-hour advanced level of training and become a certified CIT officer. We have taught mental health first aid to all of our commissioned staff. Chief Belmer, we signed on to the One Mind campaign back in 2015. And I can report as of February of 2020 this year, all commissioned staff at the St. Louis County Police Department have attended our 8-hour public safety version of mental health first aid. That talks about wellness, and at the same time, it also is a brief overview for those officers that haven't ever had a part of the CIT program. It gives them an overview of mental illness. We are executive board members on the St. Louis Area CIT Coordinating Council. I sit as the chair of that organization, which makes me ultimately responsible for the CIT program in St. Louis County, St. Louis City, and all the municipalities. It is my role and responsibility to coordinate with the state CIT council and bring all of that new information and new facts and new studies to all the CIT officers here in the St. Louis County region and make sure that they're up to date with their training and making sure that their departments are squared away with their policies and procedures. We are also the only 2 officers that offer any type of homeless assistance. Between 45 and 60% of any given homeless population within our country has known or suspected mental illness. So therefore, we're the ones that go out and we conduct homeless outreach with a lot of our local resource providers and St. Louis County homelessness organizations. Just to share, our annual calls for service, and I apologize, that is for the most part all of our daily roles and responsibilities for the crisis intervention unit. So now the one last piece I would like to do is share our annual calls for service. For 2019, calls for service for the Division of Patrol and Special Operations that responds to calls for service, such as the Transit Police or K9, those that are answering 911 calls for service. EDP, violent EDP, or attempt suicides for 2019 was 4,425 calls for service. So far for 2020, EDP, violent EDP, and attempt suicides, that's from January 1 to 7/8 of this year, we responded to 3,111 total calls for service involving mental health crisis. Our patrol and CIT officers have generated 602 CIT reports that have been referred to my office this year. And out of all of those 602 reports, only 12 of those resulted in less lethal use of force, which is 1.9%. These officers are doing a fantastic job of going out and de-escalating these situations and then finding the appropriate diversion when needed for these individuals that live within our community with mental illness. Do you have any questions?
Is it the goal that we would have every officer trained in CIT?
It's a very good question, sir. There are different outlooks on that when it comes to CIT training and should it be given in the academy. I could say I was a staff instructor at our academy for a couple of years. I've been a generalist instructor for our academy for more than a decade now. And with that, CIT truly is labeled as an advanced level of training. So I know that a concern for many executive command staff across this country is, let's make sure that we give our police officers a solid foundation in the police academy of understanding tactics, of understanding mental illness, of understanding our laws. There's so much to learn. I mean, you know, in the 6 months of training, I don't know the exact number, but there's more than 950 hours of training that's done within our academy right now. That's throwing a lot of information at these young men and women. So with that, they graduate from the academy. They have 15 weeks of field training. That's more training. That's more teaching, more instruction that goes on. Then they have the remainder of their first year as a probationary period. That's still a test. That's where they're still continuing to learn. At the way our policy reads right now, once they're off probation, then the precinct commander and watch commanders will find those that are most interested and have good communication skills and want to volunteer for the program, and that's who attends the program as the way that our policy is written right now.
Do we have, do our dispatchers
We do.
try to select, when they receive a call, select a CIT officer?
Absolutely.
Or another, at the first response to the call, is this an appropriate call for a CIT officer?
Absolutely. So we actually offer 2 times a year an 16-hour telecommunicator CIT course. The very first person that somebody normally talks to when they're in crisis and they call 911 is a dispatcher. So whether it be a low-level mental health crisis that a CIT officer is going to, or it could be a suicidal or mental health barricade that ultimately the crisis negotiation team is going out and responding to, we teach our dispatchers to de-escalate, build rapport, and have a better understanding, because sometimes a dispatcher is going to be on the phone with an individual for 30 to 60 minutes, especially if it comes to a situation where our negotiation team is responding. We actually practice being transferred from the dispatcher after possibly 45 to 90 minutes of them talking, and then introducing us as the crisis negotiator, and we make sure that there's a smooth transition. So with that, also to answer your question, the dispatchers do know what officers are CIT trained and not. On our CAD screens, computer automated dispatch, we have attributes. Every single officer that's on our department, when they are logged on the computer, they have an attribute. One of the attributes is, are they CIT trained or not? So when a call taker is taking a 911 call or even a non-emergency call for service, and they recognize that there's some level of mental health crisis, whether that be dispatched as the EDP, violent EDP, or attempt suicide, then they will look at the attribute and they will find the closest CIT officer to respond. That is within our protocol and procedure. Yes, sir.
Our officers who respond are in uniform.
Yes.
And I saw
So the one thing to share, so if you look at the backside of the page, that is our state CIT pin. Every CIT trained officer in the entire state of Missouri wears that pin. Just to share numbers, since its inception in 2003, more than 5,000 officers have been trained in the St. Louis County region in CIT, and we have more than 9,500 in the entire state of Missouri, and they all wear that pin. So if somebody that has a mental health crisis lives in St. Louis and they recognize that CIT officer trained, and they happen to travel to Springfield or to Kansas City for the weekend, and they become into crisis, they will recognize that officer is CIT trained when they actually make contact with them. Now, for myself and my team, when we go out, our day-to-day uniform is civilian clothes. We've conducted research and we've interviewed people to where anybody that has any level of mental health disorder, if they are in a state of psychosis or if they're non-compliant with their medications, we don't want to scare them. Our job is to build rapport, build relationships, and get them access to community resources and ultimately help them. So I don't go knocking on somebody's door in uniform. I don't even wear this. I wear these type of pants and a t-shirt, and I cover up my badge and my gun. My name is Gary. I'm a crisis intervention officer, and I'm here to help you. Yes, ma'am.
Sounds like you've had.
Thank you, Jill. I still don't even know what Shamara.
Sounds like you've had 500 calls a month this year. If you've had 3,000, so do you have adequate staff, if there's only 2 of you, to manage this volume of need? And is there a percentage of this that really isn't even something you all should be engaged in at all? And in fact, a different kind of team completely could manage, meaning there's no threat of violence present.
That's a good question. So The first response would be when it comes to our calls for service. Calls for service have definitely, they're constantly on the increase. And I'm sure that has something to do even possibly with COVID. A lot of people are at home, a lot of people are anxious. They're not within their daily routines. So with that, when it comes to how we go out in the community, the one thing I'll tell you is, would I be appreciative of having an opportunity to have more officers assigned to the crisis intervention unit? Absolutely. I think every single unit within our department is always going to welcome more additional, officers to their unit. So would that be beneficial? Absolutely, that'd be great. I can tell you the one thing, and I'll tell this to all of you today, and we tell it anytime when we're giving a community presentation. Officer Kester and I are very passionate about our job, and we will tell you flat out that we're blessed to be in our position. Because every single day, we have an opportunity to save lives, and we do that nearly on a daily basis. If you're not willing to be attached to your phone and take calls from communities that are from individuals that live with mental illness in our community at 6 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock at night, 2 a.m. when they're in crisis, this isn't the job for you. I take calls 24/7 to those that I've established relationships and rapport with within our community to prevent them from getting to a point where they have to call 911 and possibly have an interaction with an officer that they don't know. So that's a large piece of what we do. When it comes to responding to these situations, I think that's it would be difficult to honestly tell you that it shouldn't be a law enforcement response or a CIT response, because I can tell you I've had candid conversations with the 2 social workers that are assigned to me, especially if you watch the media today and you see the questions that are being raised about social workers and law enforcement. I can tell you right now, I love having a social worker in the CMHL assigned to my team. That is a fantastic tool and resource, but I can tell you, I work with them and see them and talk to them on a daily basis. And the 2 of them have approached me and said, there's no way I would ever do this job if I wasn't with you. And they've told me that blatantly. And I believe them. These officers that are CIT trained, they love what they do. They go out, they de-escalate these situations. If you look at our total, 1.9% for use of force out of 3,100 calls for service, they're going out and they're de-escalating and they're making these situations better. A large piece of what we do with our community outreach, I go all over. Whoever wants to know about CIT and learn about what it is we do and how we can help their community, I give that presentation. Foster parents, churches, doctors, whoever wants to know, we share that CIT message so that way people know in our community that they can have faith within our law enforcement officers and our CIT officers, that they're going to arrive on the scene and that they're going to de-escalate, build rapport, and they're going to get them the appropriate diversion and put them in contact with the appropriate resources to help their situation and help make them better.
Could you expand your scope with more CMHL individuals assigned to your team? So
before April this year, I had 3 CMHLs, and one of them actually left for a private firm. So there is one position that's open, but again, the CMHL program is paid for by the state of Missouri Department of Mental Health. So the one full-time BHR and the one full-time BJC Behavioral Health, even though they are employees of those organizations, they are then refunded their annual salaries by DMH. If it expanded, it would be a great opportunity. Yes, ma'am. Any last questions?
So the expansion would have to come from the state?
Yes.
Or we could just decide to allocate more resources?
There could be an allocation of it. The one thing that we have to be considerate of is the Department of Mental Health is a medical organization. So when it comes to licensing and the understanding of medications, being able to take on the legal ramifications of a social worker making recommendations to someone's mental health, That's more for hospitals and community medical providers, not the police.
Any other questions?
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next on, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Keith Wildhaber from the Diversity. He's going to give you goals and functions.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for allowing me to stand in front of you and talk for a little bit today about the Diversity and Inclusion Unit. I know we had a couple conversations with Dr. Punch, but I don't know if I was able to ever introduce formally to the board the sergeant I work with on a daily basis, Sergeant Justin Nichols. He's pretty much the glue holding this thing together now. He's got a very bright future here. His mind, it goes like crazy, and I'm trying to keep up with him. But doing phenomenal work for me in that unit, and we're really making some progress. One thing about this Diversity and Inclusion Unit is brand new. It started in January. We had a lot of stuff to do to get hit the ground running. Administrative stuff, just basically getting furniture, getting phone lines, getting email addresses set up. Figured out what our purpose is. What was our mission statement? What was our vision statement? So those were the first things that we tackled early in January. And we're one of the only agencies in this metropolitan area with a diversity and inclusion unit. So our purpose is to intentionally lead the way in demonstrating how our employee properly reflects the police department's statements of values. Everything goes back to our statement of values. We have to have a conscious and consistent reflection that moves us closer to understanding the oneness of our community. Developing a mission statement, we wanted to keep our mission statement very concise, and I've got it up there for you. I'm going to read it to you. The mission of the Diversity and Inclusion Unit is to listen, learn, teach, and nurture the spirit of the community. So we're going to do real near term. Vision statement looking down the road. Our department will reflect the community we serve while cultivating a culture and climate of diversity, inclusion, and respect for every person we encounter. Whether it be internally, externally, we're going to cultivate that relationship and that spirit of our community. One of the things we start out doing in January is we were new to this. We went out and we met with a lot of our partners in the community that have diversity and inclusion programs up and running. We went to Washington University, sat down with Dr. Adrienne Davis. Phenomenal information from Dr. Davis on how we should proceed in getting this unit set up, what our goals should be. She recommended we talk to Nicole Hudson. Nicole Hudson was very important in the Fort Worth and Ferguson, and she's now at Washington University, and she runs their Academy of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Then we went into some of our community partners, Jewish Community Center, Islamic Foundation. I don't want to read them all to you, but they're all up there. These are organizations that we went in and sat down with face-to-face meetings through January and in February. We wanted to reach out to some of our business partners. A lot of them have very robust diversity and inclusion units. Nestle Purina, Boeing, Centene, InBev, and the regional chambers. Next slide. We knew when we were put in this role, there was only two of us. Justin and I can't undertake 65 years of culture on our own. We need to know what's going on out in the field, all our specialized units. So we created a diversity and inclusion committee. Strictly voluntary basis. We sent emails out, set a meeting. We had 60 members from across the department who agreed to participate on the committee. 60. We hold monthly meetings, or we were holding monthly meetings with our committee until the COVID crisis. We do have a Zoom meeting scheduled to get our committee back together, so we don't have 60 people cramped in a room. We had to look at what was the purpose of our committee. And we came up, well, we allowed the committee to develop a purpose statement, broke that committee up into teams, and they voted on what they thought would be a good purpose statement. They combined some, they pulled some words out, put some words in, and this is what they came up with. The purpose of the committee is to foster an inclusive and equitable work environment where the department is held accountable for amending practices to be both fair and impartial to all employees. There's a sense in some of our employees that we have some unfair practices. The biggest one that committee came with was we don't agree with the promotional process. We also established some regular meetings with the folks over at Hazel Irby's office. They've got an office of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Recently, during the pandemic, we partnered with them and we did some homeless outreach, distributing care packets to areas that we know there were homeless encampments of people who weren't getting the hand sanitizer, the abilities to wash their hands, they had some food in there, some water. Very nice packets they put together for us. We got them distributed to our precincts all over the county, not just north, not just south. We had a big homeless encampment in Fenton. Went out there and did outreach with those folks. We met with the St. Louis County Police Association. We wanted to hear their concerns. We met with the Ethical Society of Police. We wanted to hear their concerns. Met with the St. Louis County Police and Municipal Academy. St. Louis County Police and Municipal Academy. And that was, we want to set up some in-service training at our academy. First, a pretty easy one. We want to get out there, introduce ourselves to the officers so they know we're here. They know there's a safe space if they want to come talk to somebody, and give them a general idea of what we plan to accomplish in this unit. Also, I will be participating in the Chiefs Committee meetings and sitting through the Department Command Staff meetings. Things we've accomplished training-wise. FBI Civil Rights Color Law training. We attended the Webster University Diversity and Inclusion Conference. We were scheduled to travel to Houston for the National Diversity Leadership Conference and a certification program. That certification program would allow us to become certified after a 5-day curriculum and a testing period in diversity and inclusion. Opens up a whole toolbox for us on lesson plans for teaching implicit bias training, things to look for that could spiral out of control and cause agencies problems. That course was postponed due to the pandemic and the lack of travel. They've rescheduled that for September, and we will be completing that on a virtual basis instead of actually going face-to-face. We'll be one of the only departments in this region with certified diversity and inclusion specialists. Things that we accomplished. Folks, you got to really sit back and think. We got started in January. We worked through January, worked through February. March, the pandemic hit us. We got assigned to some different roles. I don't want there to be a misconception that while we're in these different roles, that we weren't working on diversity and inclusion stuff. I was assisting personnel and human resources with monitoring employee surveys as far as if they had an exposure, if they travel out of town or coming back to town, and making decisions on whether they should return back to duty. I wasn't getting a whole lot of those, so I was still able to go out, research policies, read, and stay on track. So I've heard some talk that diversity and inclusion shut down completely. That's false. We did not shut down. I know Justin didn't shut down because I'll still get emails from him with his thoughts and stuff he was working on. So any suggestion of that's untrue. We also completed a workflow process, how we're going to get the concerns, whether it be from the committee in the normal process that the general orders go through. So there is a new general order proposed. We've been included in that review committee so we could read it and make sure there's no diversity inclusion issues that we could address and communicate that through research and analysis and the command staff. We're working on a diversity and inclusion unit newsletter, and that's going to be a monthly newsletter out to the department. And it may Black History Month. We may make sure we get something about that, the history of that. Gay Pride Month. Get that information out there. This is what's going on. These are some events scheduled, just so officers on the department are aware of what's going on and what the diversity and inclusion unit is working on. We asked for an employee demographic report, and the research and analysis folks put that together for us. We've been digging into that just to kind of see how the department is staffed. Where are our officers assigned? Where's the bulk of the African American officers? Where's the bulk of our Asian officers? How is the department staffing? And would it be better to have a diversified workforce, or listen to what our community members are saying? We want people in our community that look like us. So it's a fine line where we have to balance and figure out what's going to be best for this organization. We should look at this as this is one community. This isn't segregated communities all over St. Louis. That's kind of why we're in the situation we are with the segregation. We also received the draft of the recommended sergeants and lieutenants promotional policy. We worked on that policy. We read the policy. We reached out to other police agencies and the International Association of Chiefs of Police to see what best practices were. Where's our liability in a promotional process that looks like the one we have right now? They gave us some great ideas. We wrote up our recommendations, and we've sent them up through the chain of command, through research and analysis, and they will eventually go to the chief, and we would welcome to sit down and have a meeting and discuss that, the suggestions we have. There's got to be a compromise on some of this stuff. I'd like to mention the chief and I have had some very good conversations already. We spoke about diversity and inclusion, where this unit's going, what our plans are. So that's been a very refreshing open door. This next slide shows us our workflow. If there's a call for change, it might come from the committee, it might just come through the normal stakeholder process. We'll examine the scope of the issue, conduct necessary research, whether that's reviewing other agencies' policies. We've been leaning on the New Orleans Police Department because they've been under the consent decree since 2010. A lot of their policies are very progressive. They're very FBI driven, and they seem to be putting some very progressive and very transformational changes in place on that police department. I believe you went to Tulane, so you're probably aware of some of the situations down there.
Well before those.
What are our plans to accomplish here in the, say, near and long term? We're going to work on our strategic plan and lay out a plan for 2 to 3 years on what we think are very important issues we need to accomplish and prioritize what needs to be done now and what we work on gradually. I've already mentioned the promotional practices. That's that first item on there. We want to look at some of our recruitment and our hiring. Back to New Orleans, they've got a very robust recruitment and hiring process. It's really interesting. In 2018, 57% of their applicants to the New Orleans Police Department came from outside of Louisiana. And they did that through social media campaigns, targeted radio advertising in Houston and nearby cities. They were having a hard time getting officers to work there. It's not one of the higher paying departments. We want to establish a recruitment methodology for targeting our underrepresented minorities. Through our community colleges, through our military bases, as these soldiers, Marines are coming out of the military. Best hiring practices, we look looked at the way the application comes into the department, how that application is being processed, and how long that process is. There were like 13 steps in that application process, and I think we lose a lot of applicants because that process is so long and seems pretty inefficient. We're going to look at that, look at some best practices, and make those recommendations. There's been some talk that officers don't feel like discipline out of the Bureau of Professional Standards is always consistent. One officer might get punished for something a little more severely than another officer is. Now, we understand there could be mitigating circumstances and stuff we don't know about that complaint that they're privy to down there. Just gotta make sure that there's a matrix and those punishments are online unless there is some mitigating circumstances. One of the things I found most interesting when we got started is the St. Louis County Police Department does not have a standalone policy that we prohibit discrimination. The way I envision it, you open our policy book, here's your code of conduct. First policy you come to is this department doesn't tolerate discrimination. Internally with our contractors or anybody else doing business with the police department. A lot of agencies have these policies. Ours is kind of buried on page 6 of a 2003 version of the workplace harassment policy. I'm going to tell you across the Memorial Park here, when you bring a 17-year-old policy in to court, they laugh at you. Granted, there's a 3-year review of our policies. But those reviews need to be documented that we've kept up with this. There's been a lot of Supreme Court rulings since 2003 and a lot of things that our policy doesn't cover. There was some talk out of the committee, some pay disparities among department personnel. Spoke with the chief, and I know she's keenly aware of that, and she's working on that. So we look forward to continue those conversations and working with her and trying to get the information back out to the committee. There's some stuff in the works, and we like that. Call for change on updating our bathroom policies. We're working with Public Works, Oakland County Government, and also their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Unit to get some gender-neutral bathrooms in county facilities. They've surprisingly enough, they made a list of every bathroom that's in a St. Louis County-owned building, and they are actually working forward on that to get some gender-neutral bathrooms. Now, commissioners, with the formal PowerPoint presentation out of the way, I would request a little leniency in addressing a lingering concern. If you'd grant me this extra minute and a half of speaking, and I'll be glad to take any questions. When I was asked to assume the role as a commander of the Diversity and Inclusion Unit, I admittedly had no formal training or experience in this area. What I did have was a lived experience with the desire to make sure no employee on this police department was made to feel like I did for 4 years. I jumped at John Belmer's offer and opportunity to make this a better and more inclusive police department. However, there are some on the department and in our community who feel I can't do this job because I'm a white male. I've heard the criticism within the local community. During a press conference last month, a reporter from Channel 5 News asked a representative from the Ethical Society of Police if there had been any meetings between the newly created Diversity and Inclusion Unit and the Ethical Society. To my dismay and disappointment, that the representative for Ethical Society indicated there had not been. Commissioners, this was untrue. I assumed this role on January 1st. On January 16th, we held the first Diversity and Inclusion Committee meeting, where an Ethical Society of Police representative was present and actively participated in the meeting. 2 weeks later, Captain Cox, Sergeant Nichols, and I convened a meeting with an Ethical Society of Police representative in the Diversity and Inclusion office. The purpose of this meeting was to introduce ourselves and listen to the concerns. I felt it was a very productive discussion, and I looked forward to continuing that dialogue. On February 27th, we convened our second Diversity and Inclusion Committee meeting. An Ethical Society of Police representative was present and actively participated in that meeting as well. I embraced this role to advocate for all, not to use it as a platform to be an activist. I want to help prevent another situation like my own. Transformative change takes effort and engagement. I intend to do that through listening and not through anger. I will strive to hear the voices of all within this department, and I will do my best to make sure their voices are heard. I see that as my charter. If you disagree, I welcome further discussion on that. Commissioners, I'm open to any questions.
I don't actually have a question, but I'd like to discuss copies of the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Other questions? I would like to ask that.
Yes, Judge.
You had a couple of things you thought needed to be looked at. One was promotional policies. The other was a clear diversity statement of policy for the department.
Yes.
Those are the two. The two main things you were thinking.
On my agenda, Judge, I put those as 1 and 2. We know the reason we're here today, and I think that promotion policy is it's antiquated. And since I've been in this department 26 years, I've never heard an officer say, "Man, we got the best and the most fair promotional policy out there."
Okay, on the promotional policy, did I understand that you looked at the sergeant and lieutenant promotional policy and had made a suggestion to command?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's working its way out.
It is.
And we will see something that might remedy or improve that. Would that also be a framework to apply to all promotional policy? Not just sergeant or lieutenant, or why just those two is my question.
I mentioned the sergeants, lieutenants, all the promotional policies are incorporated in that one, whether it be the captain, lieutenant colonel, executive director, they're all included in there.
Okay.
The biggest call for change we're hearing is from officers going from sergeants going to lieutenants.
Okay, that's good. But that's in process, and so that will come to us as something concrete that we can look at and address.
Absolutely.
Okay. And the diversity policy statement. Okay. Have you proposed one? Is that where are we?
Are you talking the discrimination policy?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Discrimination.
Yes, Judge. We have working with research and analysis. We've looked at some agencies' policies. St. Louis City has a quick 1-page policy on non-discrimination. Kansas City has about a 16-page policy. We're trying to find somewhere in the middle. Kansas City was high in definitions. They defined just about everything. I like that aspect of it, but the policy seemed too long. I like the cities because it was short, it was concise, and it hit home and it made the point. Doctor?
Thank you so much for the presentation. Concerns I have repeatedly shared is that identity and personal lived experience are not adequate for having the knowledge, experience, and capacity to dig deep into these very personal and emotional processes. And I'm worried that there is not, well, I commend you all for doing the work that you did and the research you did. I've repeatedly said there needs to be a D&I expert who has been trained and taught and been doing this and has a degree and understands it, because these things can become so personal and can be quite difficult to navigate when you are in it. I'm not going to lie, your comment about your defensiveness about the Ethical Society statement that's problematic, right? Because you guys are so in it. This is deeply emotional and very hard work to do. For instance, when I think about me doing it in my workspace, right, it's really hard. I actually have outsiders, right, who are experts and completely removed from the situation who help me understand and navigate that in the healthcare space. So I just really want the board to consider, and I have said it before, I want to say it officially for the minutes right now, that for this unit to be successful, while I appreciate profoundly your heartfelt, really hard work, we need a D&I expert, probably a civilian, to help your unit. And I'm going to be personally advocating for that as much as I can. Because while I hear you, and believe, I feel you, right? To do this work, I think we're going to have to kind of take it a step further, so that we can truly create an inclusive environment for all. So thank you, and let's keep digging, right, into what your unit can be. And I'm hoping we can have much more discourse on this in the future.
Doctor, I fully agree with you, and I would welcome the opportunity to work with somebody who's an expert in this field. So,
and you've said as much to me, so I hear you.
So in 5 years, I can say, okay, I've learned enough that I can call myself an expert in this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Quick question.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you're currently in the process of reviewing employee demographic data.
Yes.
And there's a word on the PowerPoint that said report. So my question is, are you planning to generate the report, or you're looking at the report of the data? And if it's the latter, what are you going to create with that report or with that analysis?
We had some discussion with the executive command staff with that last week. We shared the data that was provided to us from research and analysis. Going forward, we came up with some pretty solid ideas. But we're going right now because it's so early in the process. But I think if you give us 60, 90 days, I'd love to come back and report where we think we could go with that data. It wasn't all bad, but I will tell you one thing that jumped right out of me is south of Highway 40, we had 8 African-American police officers. South of Highway 40. We have the bulk of our African-American employees in our 1st, 2nd, and our 8th precincts. And I understand the calls that the community leaders wanted officers in their community that look like them. Well, I worked in Afton for several years. There's African-Americans that live in Afton. There's African-Americans who live in Wildwood. There's African-Americans that live in West County. There's Asians that live in North County. I don't think the argument holds a whole lot of water that everybody wants to see the policemen coming to their door as the race that they are. I think we can diversify our precincts.
So you are developing recommendations or proposals?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your work. This is not an easy job. We appreciate your effort.
It is not, but It's important. It's important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot. We appreciate it. Next up, we have Captain Jerry Moore, Tactical Operations Unit. It's going to be a meeting on tear gas and COVID.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good afternoon. I prepared my presentation and moments preparing my presentation, I kept saying good morning, so you've already thrown me off the loop. I do get here at 12:15. That's all right. So yes, for the sake of time, I put together a quick presentation. Obviously, the topic is riot control agents and COVID-19, and kind of dealing with the effects of COVID-19 as they relate to crowd control situations. In order to give it some context, what I'd like to do is talk about crowd situations, talk about St. Louis County's philosophy as it pertains to crowd situations and protests, talk a little bit about the team that we put in place, our emergency response team. Then we'll talk a little bit about the agents that we use, the riot control agents themselves, and then we'll kind of get into some recommendations and the conversation that we had with the Department of Public Health and the acting director, Spring Schmidt. And then I'll just kind of wrap it all up at the end. So crowd situations. So let me first state that the First Amendment states that people have the right to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for the redress of grievances. And that is the founding principle. That is the foundation that we have built our crowd control philosophy, our model upon, which is that our job is to protect that First Amendment right for people to peacefully assemble and for them to be able to petition their redress of grievances. What's changed in the last 6 years, so having done some civil disorder, having dealt with protests prior to 2014, is that we were kind of the intermediary. You had groups of people protesting, but we were not the focus of it. And that has changed since 2016, which has dramatically changed kind of the way crowd control, the feel of crowd control or protest situations. Because now, as opposed to standing between two different groups, the focus is the police, or it is law enforcement as a whole. And that has changed the feel of some of the protests that we've been involved with. I want to talk a little bit about terminology, just what exactly is a protest. A protest in and of itself is just what the definition says. It's an organized public demonstration of disapproval about a situation. There's nothing criminal about it. There is no act of violence. There is nothing other than just a group of people getting together to discuss a situation in which they're unhappy. The other terms that you see there, civil disorder, civil disturbance, civil disobedience, and then I'll talk about the last two there at the end, those involve some act of violence. Civil disorder or public disturbance involving numerous people who commit violent acts. Civil disorder, violent acts. Civil disobedience, slightly different. Again, it's the refusal to obey civil laws, but usually that's associated with passive resistance or nonviolent means. The reason I bring up these terms, I think it's important because sometimes they get thrown around in the media. People misuse them. And so they'll talk about, oh, there's civil disorder downtown. And that may not be true. Civil disorder would be a violent act versus a protest. So sometimes as civilians, sometimes the media, they tend to confuse the terminology. The last two there, the unlawful assembly and the riot, I put those in there because those are when a protest or an organized group of people is no longer peaceful. And again, the First Amendment allows for people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government. An unlawful assembly is when you have a group of people that get together and agree to commit violent acts. The difference between unlawful assembly and riot is when they actually do it. So an unlawful assembly is just people getting together. In the state of Missouri, it's 6 or more, but they assemble and then they agree to commit some violent act. And then a riot is actually when they follow through and they begin to commit that violent act. We'll talk a little bit about the emergency response team. So St. Louis County formed an emergency response team. And I'll just take a quick moment to publicly say how proud I am of the men and women that serve on that team. These men and women volunteer to be a part of a team that have to physically go out and stand face to face in front of protesters, which they've sworn to do. But some of the abuse that they take is unconscionable. And it is really appalling at some of the things that people say, these men and women, when they go out and try to uphold the oath that they've sworn to protect, the citizens that they've sworn to protect and serve. The mobile field force, it's a mobile field force trained. It's a FEMA class. It's put on by the Center for Domestic Preparedness. It's a 3-day class, so everybody that is on the mobile field force or the emergency response team has been mobile field force trained. It's composed of 1 captain, 4 lieutenants, 15 sergeants, and approximately 100 officers. So it's roughly 120 members. The captain is Captain John Wheeler. The lieutenants are Lieutenant Morgan, Lieutenant Hampton, Lieutenant Kelling, and Lieutenant Hoots. I won't name all 15 sergeants and 100 officers for the sake of time. They do continual training, so biannual training, so once in the spring, once in the fall. And usually the emphasis of that training isn't necessarily on marching or on line formations, but it's really more on that de-escalation technique. It's on rapport building, it's on crowd mirroring, it's on human behavior reading. So it's understanding, so it's teaching these young men and women what it is that to expect, so that when they get confronted or they are put into that situation, if they haven't already been into it, they know what to expect and they know how to conduct themselves. That officer demeanor and bearing is probably one of the most important things that I like to stress, along with de-escalation. It's hard for an individual officer on the line to de-escalate, but they do have to maintain their demeanor and bearing, and we stress that. Next slide, please. Loading.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not. There we go. Riot control agents. So riot control agents are used by law enforcement to control crowds and protect life and property. They're used after peaceful, according to the slide up here, used after peaceful methods have failed or an escalation of force is justified. The use or the decision to deploy a riot control agent is not something that is taken lightly. So that is something that is done after almost every other alternative method has been exhausted. So after attempting to de-escalate, after attempting to negotiate or communicate with an organizer, after giving warnings, so after all of these things have happened, then that decision to deploy riot control agents. And even then, it's in a controlled manner. So those riot control agents are deployed by officers that are authorized and trained to carry them. And to kind of put that in context, there's been over 80 protests here locally since May 30th. And actually that number is probably a little bit higher now, but they've only been deployed twice in St. Louis County. So that would have been on the first night, May 30th, and then May 31st. Try the next slide. All right, there we go. The 3 types of riot control agents. There's 3 on here. The chemical names are up there: CN, CS, and OC. Just a quick history. CN was developed in 1871. It was used by the military until about 1959. CS was actually developed in the 1920s and then replaced CN in 1959. And then OC was developed in the 1960s, became as an animal control agent, became popular in the 80s and 90s within the law enforcement community. The only two that we use are CS and OC. CN is essentially phased out. I don't know of any agencies that continue to use CN, but CS and OC are the 2 types of chemical agents that we have. The OC is basically just a derivative of what you would know as pepper spray. It's different than mace. So again, terminology, people say that you have mace, but the main ingredient of mace is CN, whereas OC, the main ingredient of OC would be a naturally, basically, chemical that comes from peppers. All of these agents produce about the same effects: reddening of the eyes, irritation of the nose, nasal secretions, salivation, airways, coughing, possible feeling of shortness of breath. The effects are temporary and they decrease when crowds disperse. Obviously, if you hit the next slide for me, the one I just mentioned there, the coughing, that is of concern. So when I met, or we had a meeting with the Department of Public Health, they mentioned 4 areas of concern as it relates to COVID-19. So the first is the spread of the disease. And so one, the lack of social distancing that's typically occurring when people are getting together to protest, even though that there are some fake people wearing face coverings, just the general proximity of people. And then if you are to introduce chemical munitions into that environment, So anything that would irritate the lining of their lungs, anything that would cause you to cough or sneeze, obviously, intuitively, without being a doctor, would increase the risk of exposure if you had somebody that was positive with COVID-19. The irritation in the mucosal lining, long-term health concerns and contamination were the other areas that we discussed. Irritation in the mucosal lining is just what it sounds like. It's basically COVID-19 inflames the lining of your lungs, and if you introduce a chemical munition which would irritate your lungs, what is the effect of a chemical munition with somebody that would have a COVID-19 positive? The best answer I can give you, and it comes from an article which was actually written in April. It was written April 6th of 2020, prior to the George Floyd incident. And Dr. Ho, Jeffrey Ho, is a medical director for the Meeker County Sheriff's in Minnesota and the chief EMS medical director in Hennepin. And basically, he puts what you would intuitively know as to whether or not OC or chemical directly puts lung tissue that is COVID-19 positive in danger. There is no data to support or refute that because it has not been studied. Simply put, the answer is we just don't know. So as to number two, irritation in the mucosal lining, again, yes, I would, introducing chemical munitions is probably not good for that. As to any kind of long-term impact effect, I don't know if there's any data out there to support one way or the other. Long-term health concerns, again, you're talking about the long-term health concerns in general with chemical munitions versus long-term health concerns of chemical munitions at somebody with COVID-19. Most of the studies out there that revolve around the use of chemical munitions show that the lethality or the toxicity or the permanent damages of chemical munitions is rather small and slight, in the sense that the studies in, let's put this, the studies out there show that the use of chemical munitions have very little negative effect. However, the studies are questioned in the sense that there are no studies that really involve elderly or involve children. So most of the studies out there that have been conducted involving riot control agents are of healthy males. I don't know of an organization that would want to put elderly people or children into a study where they try to expose them over long-term or long time frames in close quarters. Contamination. Again, contamination is just getting riot control agent or riot control, these chemicals on your clothing or on your mask. And does that then continue to affect somebody? So if I have a mask and I've been exposed, does that continue to affect me over a period of time? And are there ways that we can decontaminate or eliminate that, that problem? So some of the areas that we can do better, some of the things that we talked about, is just a better job of messaging. So prior to deployment of any chemical munition, warnings are always given. So there's an announcement given that this is either a riot or an unlawful assembly, and now we are now asking people to disperse. We tell them they may be subject to arrest. We tell them that they may be subject to chemical munitions. And now that we're operating in this environment, it's possible, or it would probably be a good idea just to remind people that if they are exposed to chemical munitions, that may increase their risk of exposure to COVID-19, just due to the coughing and the environment that they would be in. More of an effort regarding decontamination, whether that would be being able to provide masks. So if a mask is exposed, if it's contaminated, not only for officers, but for civilians, so people that are attending, is there a possibility that we could give them masks and attempt to decontaminate maybe some of that clothing? And then the third point on here is attempt to target those individuals that are committing criminal acts. And so one of the complaints, and valid complaints, is that when we use chemical munitions, we do tend to touch everyone in the crowd. So the people that there are protesting peacefully are now indiscriminately involved in this chemical munition because there are people that are taking advantage of the protest. So this is something that we've been doing since 2014, but we're attempting to target those individuals that are committing those criminal acts, and that thereby not touching people that are not committing criminal acts, that are just exercising their First Amendment right, which we are trying to protect. So in conclusion, maybe no. There you go. So that's fine. So in conclusion, this is the goal. So having been involved with crowd control protest activities over a period of my career, this is what I'm looking for. I want people to be able to come out. I want them to be able to demonstrate. And I think we do a very good job of showing some discretion in the sense that we allow people to take the roadways. We allow people to go onto property that maybe we wouldn't normally allow. And here's a picture from downtown. And this is a beautiful thing. The beauty of our country is that people can assemble and do these things. Obviously, this group is they're upset and they come together and they are trying to make change. And our job is to protect them while they do that. That's a picture there of Captain Harry Dilworth, and I don't know if any of you have met him, but he works for the city of Ferguson, and this is taken on May 30th. This is taken about 4 hours before they decide to try to burn the Ferguson Police Department down. But this just shows you the fact that there are officers, there are groups out here. This is ultimately what we're looking for, is that ability to have those conversations, to go out and partner with these groups as they are either having conversation or exercising their First Amendment right. Unfortunately, this is what happens sometimes. You have groups of individuals, and I won't even call them protesters, but you have groups of individuals that either hijack these events or that come out and try to hide behind the event for some criminal activity. You see the individual up there in the picture, and he's holding a hammer. And you can see that they've already broken those windows. And then again, now you have those are officers standing behind that firework. So now you have groups of people in the crowd that are now beginning to shoot fireworks. So as we push those individuals off of that lot, so after they're breaking windows, after they're shooting fireworks into the interior of the building, and we begin to try to move that crowd, this is what happens. And this is taken on May 30th. Next picture. This is a picture of a helmet. And as you can see there, that's a rock that hit that helmet and cracked it all the way across. And again, so not only are they shooting fireworks, but now these individuals are throwing rocks. Next picture. That's one of my officers that got his shin hit with a rock and ended up getting a stitch in his leg, and not only his ankle. The picture here, it's relatively hard to see because it's such a wide lens, but you'll notice all those objects on the ground, all those white rocks. So there are a group of officers that are standing behind Vincenzo's back there, that restaurant, and those are the rocks that are being thrown at those officers. And again, I just show you this to kind of give you an idea of what the environment is like. And I'll play a video here at the end, which will kind of give you some context. Kathy's Kitchen, broken, windows destroyed. Quiznos, I'm just going to cycle through there. Vincenzo's. It's one of Lee's Beauty Salon, and this is another beauty store. And so with the point of showing you these pictures, the point of showing some of that is, again, to give you context. Our job is to protect people's First Amendment right to peacefully assemble and protest. But when it changes, when those acts occur, not only do I have an obligation to protect my officers, I have an obligation to protect those businesses, and we have to be able to somehow disperse that crowd. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of good alternatives. And I say the use of riot control agents is probably the least harmful of my alternatives. So I can either wade out into the crowd with batons, and we can try a physical force, or I can try to uncomfortably make you leave an area and disperse you from that area. But again, I want to stress the fact that the use of chemical munitions is never taken lightly, and it is only once these efforts to de-escalate and to minimize any potential of injury to anyone have occurred. I'm going to play you this video, and it's about a 2-minute video, and it's taken the night of it's actually May 31st at this point, so it's about 1 in the morning. And it's 2 minutes long, and it's going to be hard to see because it's dark. But just to basically give you an idea, it's an officer's wearing a body camera. I'm going to play it here. He's standing in front of the Ferguson Police Department, facing across the street at 81 block. All right, so a couple things just to point out there. One, the first is you hear a rock and you actually hear it hit. Second is you see the firework go off next to those officers. And again, what that movement was it was a physical attempt to cross the street to displace the group of people that were there. So if you're familiar with Ferguson Police Department, the Ferguson Police Department looks out across Andy Worms. To the right of that, as you look out, is a subway. Tipton is the road right there. And at that time, it was a physical movement of officers, which I asked them to physically go across the street and try to clear out those parking lots. And as they made that movement, you saw that gunfire. And if you actually watch the video, you can see the muzzle flash. So you can see the muzzle flash from those individuals that are standing in front of that subway shooting their guns. I have to say tremendous restraint from all of the officers that are there. Not one of them returned fire. You can see it, and if you look on the car, you can see that he has his gun up, but he does not indiscriminately fire into that crowd. He does not take a shot that he should not have taken. But again, this just gives you some context. Yeah, he says gas that shit. I mean, let's call it what it is. That's just real life. He does say it in the middle of that video. That's him saying it out of frustration. He tells you right at the beginning of the video. It's him essentially narrating his own little movie. But essentially, what does he say? I don't like it. I'm not comfortable with this. And then they throw a rock. And then they shoot fireworks. And he says gas it. And why does he say that? Because he knows that physically going over there significantly increases the risk of injury, not only to citizens, but to officers. Because that's going to be a face-to-face confrontation with somebody that's armed. And so again, in conclusion, I just wanted to play the video, and it's really just to give you kind of a feel. I think sometimes people don't understand if you haven't been there, if you haven't walked it at midnight or haven't walked it at 11 o'clock. Again, 90%, 95% of people that come out to protest are peaceful protesters. They're there for the right reasons. Unfortunately, once it gets dark, typically, people hijack these events. And that's what you're left with at the end of the night. Those people aren't protesting anything. They're there to cause damage. They're there to vandalize. They're there to take advantage of an opportunity. And unfortunately, that hurts the message that the 90 to 95% of the people that are protesting are trying to get relayed. And so, in conclusion, again, I just want to publicly say, man, I'm very proud of those men and women that go out there and do that every day. I'm proud of the men and women that are sitting in this room. Because again, I know deep down that we are trying to uphold that First Amendment right. We are here to make sure that people have the right to peacefully protest. And we do everything that we can to make sure that we protect that value, we protect that oath that we've sworn to uphold. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Again, can you send us the presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Since May 31st, has the department been successful in dispersing situations using the less extreme measures? The warnings, the physical violence?
It's certain, yes, at certain times. So most of what we were involved with as an agency where we were in charge was that first 9 or 10 days. So May 30th kind of ran through June, I don't want to get my date wrong, 8th or 9th, it would have been like the following Monday. So we were in charge of that event. That was our ERT team. What's happened since then has shifted. So obviously there's been incidents that are occurring in Florissant. We are not in charge of those. Now we participate, so we send support. And yes, have they been successful at times? Yes. There are times when physical arrests are made, and then officers may deploy handheld OC spray. So not the launchable, not a continuous burn, not in the context of a large environment. Again, that's more targeted, which is I'm only pepper spraying those individuals that would be directly in front of me or somebody that's trying to interfere with that arrest. Yes, I think the attempts have, to answer your question, yes, I think they have been more successful. And again, and I can't speak for the city, I can't speak for groups that are outside of what I've just been involved with. But overall, yeah, yes, I do. I think they've been better.
So have St. Louis County police officers deployed chemical agents in part of the action that's been taking place fluorescent.
Pepper spray, yes, handheld pepper spray.
I know for a fact that some of that pepper spray ended up on the body of one of my medical students who was standing there peacefully protesting. So while I appreciate very much the details of your presentation, it would seem to me that there's been a failure somewhere with the intention that you've described and the lived experience of people who are there protesting. So I really appreciate this update, but it would seem to me that I think, Chief, that we need to talk about this, and perhaps I would request basically a meeting with your unit and you and Chair. You tell us, but I think while I hear what you're saying, that's not the lived experience of people that I personally know, who were there with zero capacity to behave violently and zero intent, and yet they had experienced this. So there's a disconnect here.
Sure, and I'll be honest, I'd love to, and I appreciate that, Doctor. I'd love to know the specifics of that case, because that way I could look into it.
What I haven't heard though is a policy that's reflective of the concerns that the health department shared. Because if there are concerns, and if we're not being able to successfully individually target folks who are within the definitions of what you consider to be unlawful or rioting, that, what is the policy going to be, right? That mitigates this harm to those who don't even fit into unlawful assembly. And what are the things we need to change so that doesn't happen? Because there is added risk, and it doesn't just go away. The next day, people very much still have acute symptoms, and then the long-term symptoms are real. So what is the policy? We need a policy. We need to sit down and work on a policy emerging.
Do we have a written continuum force policy?
We do. Yes.
So, we have a policy that addresses it, but maybe not specific.
Not specific, I guess if your question is a policy specific to the COVID-19.
Yeah. But that's what I mean.
Yeah, because we have a policy, we do have policy.
Yeah, would you describe that?
So yes, the use of force continuum as it pertains to chemical munitions. And so obviously you have officer presence, and then you work your way up through the basically increasing levels of basically force in chemical munitions, especially there's use of force continuum as it pertains to an officer, an individual officer as they conduct their day-to-day activities. And then there is also a policy on the use of chemical munitions during crowd control. And so again, an individual officer, a member of ERT, does not have the ability to they have the ability to introduce OC, but not SCS or not any kind of indiscriminate, launchable, hand-thrown, continuous burn type of chemical munition. Does that answer, Judge, for you?
That's what we have.
Yes.
Right now. Commissioner Punch, what kind of meeting were you thinking?
Well, I mean, there is a disconnect between our principles and our community's experience. I think that requires immediate action because it's creating harm. And it's the kind of harm that perpetuates the lack of trust in this department, which is exactly what all this is about. In fact, you've even introduced, I'm fascinated because you've introduced to me the concept that there is a conflict of interest in the police department representing itself in the midst of these protests. Because if normally the police department mitigates and is in between two groups protesting each other, and suddenly now the police department has become its own, it is being protested, it almost brings into question, and I'm not advocating military involvement, please do not misconstrue my words, but it almost makes me think there is a horrible conflict of interest here that you're both responsible for the safety of a group of people that's actively protesting your presence. That's mind-blowingly difficult. And I totally see that.
Well, like I said, we've been dealing with this for since 2014. And again, I have that experience in the sense that having dealt with protests, Monsanto, the genetically modified foods. Again, we were just an intermediary, so you're just a wall between two groups, and this dynamic is completely different.
And it's a dynamic where both groups are experiencing harm, and that's not okay. And that's what I think we need to urgently discuss.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have a crime update by Lieutenant Colby Dolly.
Just a second, get my PowerPoint going. Just a minute. Switch settings here. Okay. All right. Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Colby Dolly from our Bureau of Research and Analysis. I'm going to give a crime statistics update. It's got a few other things thrown in there as well. We haven't done this for a while, but a lot has happened sort of in the world with crime since I last gave an update, whenever that was. So we will go through this. So here we're looking at the UCR Part 1 crimes, and this is comparing the month of June for the last 3 years, and we're also looking at year to date. So this is through the end of June, June 30th. And you don't need to go through every single thing here because there's a lot to this if you dive into every single line on it. We will mention at the very top the homicides. We're now up to 22, so we had a big uptick in the last week or so since this was published. So I think we're at 22 compared to around 19 last year. So we're up a little bit more than we were last year. The things I have highlighted in yellow, though, are some of the things that I wanted to talk about. If you look at the ag assaults with firearms, if we go back to June of 18, June of 19, we had 43, 54. Now we jump up to 75. So we had a bad month as far as ag assaults with firearms. That's when someone is shooting at another individual. Those are also particularly dangerous because those can easily become homicides, depending on if the person's hit or not. Year to date on those, we are looking at 364 compared to 305 last year, so we're up 19% for the year. I should mention that what is sort of disturbing about this is those numbers have went up year by year. So this 19%, we saw a 19% increase last year and the year before. So these have been steadily increasing over the last basically 5 to 6 years. In a minute, I'll show you the shot spotter stats as well, which are kind of tracking the same pattern we see there. So the other things to note here are the burglaries, larcenies, and motor vehicle thefts. So these are property crimes. And you'll notice with burglaries, we go from 119, 118 to 59. So we had a huge drop off in these burglaries. I feel pretty confident to attribute that to the COVID crisis because now people are at home. Most of your burglars don't want to break into a house where someone is there. They simply want to get property, get out without getting caught. So that is curtailing a lot of that. Same type of story, I think, for larcenies. You see we go from 466, 449, now down to 328. And for the year, we're down 14%. Again, there for a while, especially with COVID, a lot of businesses were closed, so that curtailed a lot of your shoplifting. There's also a lot more people just at home in general, which provides surveillance, so people are watching outside. Things don't get stolen as easily because of that natural surveillance. The last thing I'll cover on this end is the motor vehicle theft. So the motor vehicle thefts have actually increased, even though it's a property crime. So we went from 58, 100 to 107. For the year, we're up 18%. We had huge increases last year as well in motor vehicle thefts. So the motor vehicle thefts, this has been a trend for about the last 2 years where we have a lot of stolen cars. This is not contained in just one area of the county. This is sort of spread out in different volumes at least, but it's spread out throughout the county where you see these increases. A lot of this, unfortunately, is because people leave their keys in their car. They just leave the car unlocked, leave the keys in it, and you'll have groups of individuals who they drive down the street, and they simply check the car doors, and as the numbers would have it, a certain amount of those are going to be unlocked with the keys in it, and they'll usually take all that said, I will tell you that the patterns that we see with this sort of spike in aggravated assault and violent crime, and then also a decrease in some of this property crime, that's what's being seen throughout the nation. When we go through this COVID period through the beginning of March up until now, a lot of your big cities are seeing the same type of pattern, with increase in violent crime and a decrease in property crime. With all that, we have a negative 8% difference in crime comparing 20 to 19. That is because a lot of the big numbers you see there, especially that larceny number, you're in the thousands. Once that, if that decreases, then your overall numbers are probably going to decrease. If we look at the 5-month comparison, again, this is sort of telling the same story here. So this is all this year. If we look from February to May, as we move across here on the screen for those burglaries and larcenies, and you'll see you have a huge drop off when you get in the later months once we get past COVID. Take a time out and admit somebody to the meeting. So I was telling you about the ShotSpotter. So this is sort of interesting. The ShotSpotter alerts. So we have the weeks. This is 2020. We have our weeks at the bottom here, and you get to about week 10 there. That's into March, and so all of a sudden we have this sort of jump up in the number of ShotSpotter events per week. We try to normalize this, so we have 2019 in red as the bottom, so that's our comparison. We have our 2020 number. Now, to try to make it apples to apples, we added area to ShotSpotter in 2019. So that's why you see the middle line there, which is no SPL, which is no Spanish Lake. Either way, we still have a pretty good increase in the number of ShotSpotter events. Even if we didn't have Spanish Lake, we'd still be at the gray line there. Overall, we've had about a 70% increase in shots fired calls. So there's a lot more gunfire in the community. I don't have an answer for why that is, but it did seem to start around the time that the lockdown for COVID started. There's just a lot more activity in the community with shots fired. We look at our calls for service. So these are not crimes. These are just someone picking up the phone, calling the police, and they're responding. This is not too unusual. It's sort of what we would see for the summer months, going into the summer months. Typically, these calls for service are somewhat seasonal, like the crime is. So in the colder months, you get into February, March, you usually have depressed numbers. It starts to pick up when you get into June, and that's what we've seen. Good example of that is the North County Precinct there. That June of 2020 number is 6,292. That's a big increase of 1,000 from February. So it's actually no surprise that you have an increase in calls during the summer months. Same thing, somewhat, a little bit different relationship with the self-initiated. A lot of times you see a decrease in the self-initiated during the summer months because it's this inverse relationship of if officers are going through a lot of calls and they have less time to do self-initiated. That doesn't necessarily hold true for all the precincts. It depends. But for like the North County precinct, they have such a high call volume that you will see that relationship where you see going from February to June, their numbers are actually decreasing for the amount of self-initiated where the officers are out doing stuff. But overall, these numbers are still pretty high for all the precincts. So even with COVID restrictions in place, officers weren't stopping cars, not for the 2-month period there. You still see that they're out doing other things, doing business checks, doing extra patrols to stay busy and protect the community. Shifting gears just a little bit, so this is a crime update, but we do count other things besides just strictly crime when we talk about the updates of statistics. This is titled performance indicators. So we do have murders, we have ag assaults with firearms, which we've talked about, but we do regularly send out this information to everybody in the department about citizen complaints, internal investigations, uses of force, department vehicle accidents, vehicle pursuits, Narcan saves. We do this because these are very important things. Besides just the crime, we also need to track these different things. So the citizen complaints, we're about even where we were last year. Internal investigations, that's when a supervisor or another employee makes a complaint on another coworker. Those are down quite a bit. Uses of force are down quite a bit, 23%. And those department vehicle accidents are down a lot as well. Vehicle pursuits are up just a little. I will say with all of this, so 2020 is a very interesting year. So we had a lack of police activity, no traffic stops, lack of self-initiated there for a while. Now you have the civil unrest. I should also mention to you that if you remember back in January 1st of this year, we implemented body cams. So all of these things could be playing on these numbers here, especially the body cams with the citizen complaints and the uses of force. I don't know the causality here because you have so many confounding factors. You have all these things going on at once, but it is something worth mentioning that is in play here. The last thing I'll talk about here is our traffic stop information. So we regularly keep track of the traffic stops reported by officers. At the end of the year annually, we have to report this to the state of Missouri. So this is a table. It has all the total stops by the precincts. It then has, when it says percent unknown missing, that's simply that the officer did not know the race of the individual. When they stopped him, they couldn't tell. We don't advocate that officers ask. If they can tell, they can tell. If they can't, then they just put they don't know. And then the percent minority is the percentage of minorities that they've stopped, percent white that they've stopped. In other jurisdictions, they may have Latino. We don't have that. The numbers here, we do capture that, although it's not displayed here because the numbers are very small in the St. Louis region. And then finally, as sort of a benchmark here, and it's a whole other topic of getting into these benchmarks, but we do have the benchmark of the percent minority precincts. I can explain this more outside of the meeting if anybody has questions about it. This is a very dense topic, but this information is given out to the precinct commanders every month, and we do other reviews internally for this stuff to look in depth at these. Does anybody have any questions on any of this?
Do you track the traffic stop information as to the percentage of minority people being stopped year by year?
Yes.
And is there a trend?
Yes, there is. Overall, the number of, I have to look at the rates. I do have a presentation I can give on that, but yes, okay. So if you look at the percents, they've been converging. You have to do this per capita though, because if you look at just aggregate numbers, it doesn't always tell you much. But we are, it's not perfect, but we are improving as far as the arrest rates and search rates. Those two numbers for the different races are converging, so you almost have the two coming together.
Which you would think is good.
Yes, oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It means that, yeah, there's less disparity over the years. If you go back to 2000 when this first started, the disparity is, the gap is closing. There's less and less disparity as time goes on.
Also, how does there's an article in the paper about violent crime in St. Louis City this morning. Are we trending with them, not with them differently?
So I would say, first of all, the volume they have is much, much greater than ours, upwards of like 10 times greater. I think they quoted that they had 30 homicides in the month of June. I mean, we're at just over 20 for the year. So the volume is much higher. Our violent crime increases are concentrated geographically, though. It's mostly in the North County precinct. So where some of the crimes are spread out, so for example, the increases in motor vehicle theft are spread out throughout the county. The volumes are different, but the percent increases are higher in most precincts. The aggravated assaults, the increase in those are concentrated in North County. So that is it. I noticed that Judge Edwards said that it was everywhere in the city. That's not the case with us. Any other questions? No? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, why don't we take a